Hi, good afternoon, and welcome everybody to this amazing, powerful, and educational Lunch and Learn. My name is Patricia Houston, and this Lunch and Learn is brought to you by family partners of Morris and Sussex counties. And today we have Simone Ruffers. Welcome.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be with you today. My name is Simone. I am a doctoral student at Tufts University up in Boston, but I also worked for a number of years before this at Boston Medical Center in their developmental behavioral pediatrics program as a transition specialist. So I'm really excited to talk with you all about some things to consider with the transition to adulthood. One sort of caveat, as you may have guessed, I'm up in Massachusetts. So I have done a little bit of research and know about some of the services that are available in New Jersey, but I'm not an expert on them. So today's presentation is going to be more just generally about transition and sort of areas of topics to think about, but I won't be able to answer any very specific questions about like the availability of services or what different programs can offer. But I think, we'll be able to share the PowerPoint slides, and there are a number of resources where you can go to find more detailed information. Yeah, and if you have questions as we're going along, feel free to put them in the chat, and if I can integrate them into the talk, I will, but otherwise we'll have a Q&A at about 12:40.
Thank you very much. And I just want to remind everybody, this presentation will be recorded. At the end, as Simone mentioned it, we're going to turn off the recorder and we are going to allow time for Q&A. That part is not recorded. In relation to family partners, I just want to remind you that family partners provide services to families with special needs children or children with challenges in general, and that we are here for the families. So without further ado, Simone, you're more than welcome to take the lead.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Can you see what looks like the first slide here?
Yes.
Great.
Good.
Okay. So we are going to get right into it. There is a lot of information in this presentation. There's probably more text on the screen than might be helpful in sort of talking about it. But like I said, you'll get, be able to access these slides, and also the recording, you can, if you want to go back through and pause and read at any point, please do that. So what we're talking about here with the transition to adulthood is really the time between 16 and 21. So legally in the United States and specifically in the state of New Jersey, transition services should begin at age 16. And we'll go into sort of what we mean by transition services. But those services are available to students until they turn 21 or receive a high school diploma. So either people sort of age out of the system, or if they're on a diploma track, they might earn a diploma, and then those services would end at that point. And so again, we'll talk a little bit about sort of what that means in terms of getting the necessary supports and things that the students need. But that doesn't mean that you have to wait until 16 to sort of start the planning process. Some of these things will take a long time, and some of the skills that students can start to learn and work on can start before 16. It's just that in terms of IEP goals and things like that, that's going to really start at 16. So some really essential components of effective transition planning are that the planning is person and family centered. It really should be, the services and supports that the person needs really should be based on what they need, not just necessarily what's available. And so it's going to depend on sort of their vision for their future and what their family is able to access. And so making things as personalized as possible is really important. Additionally, creating opportunities for meaningful engagement, particularly in things like thinking about employment, finding a job, or maybe going on to higher education, or even just figuring out how to build up independence. All of that are really critical components to the person's life so that they can live sort of the best life for them. And then the last piece is coordination and collaboration. There is a lot that goes into this period of time. There are a lot of different types of services that come from different places. So it's really important to kind of be on the same page with your school team, with your other service agencies that you might be working with, because there are things that other people can support with, but also things that sort of parents, unfortunately, oftentimes fall to parents because there aren't really like centralized systems of support. So being open and collaborative as much as you can. That's not always the easiest thing, but that can really sort of help ease this process a lot. So first steps, we're talking sort of a little bit before when the transition services really kind of get started. But there are a number of things that you can kind of do to start preparing for this and being aware of what's going to happen at age 16. So this is a timeline that you can kind of look through a little bit more on your own. The slides themselves, if you click on this photo, probably not in the recording, but in the slides themselves, you should be able to get to sort of where this transition timeline came from. But a lot of what you're looking at in this period kind of before 16 is thinking a lot about school goals. And that is kind of the piece that we're going to talk about right now. Or in a second, actually. This sort of area is things that you can really start to think about sort of early, even earlier than 14, right? Working on self-advocacy skills and self-determination, right? You want your young person to be as involved in planning as they can be. Some people will be able to be more involved and some people less involved, but everybody has some level of independence, some level of decision, like vision for their future, what they want to do, what will make them happy. And so really encouraging those skills and working on that and involving the young person in the planning as much as possible is really important and helps them develop, good problem solving skills and coping skills as they go along in life. The other thing is social life and relationships. School is a really important time to be building those skills, as I'm sure you all know. And, if there are times that they can be involved in things after school or community activities, that's really going to help, foster those connections and help people to continue to be involved in social things after they are done with school. And independence a little bit, as I mentioned, involving the young person in learning how to cook, in doing things around the house, having chores, managing their own money if they get like an allowance or something like that. Managing their own schedule, like I said, everybody is going to have a different level of what they're able to do within that. But starting some of those skills early can really help people to be as independent as possible and may help them actually have the need for fewer supports and services as they get older, which can really make a huge difference. So a little bit about what happens in school. Something that is important to kind of think about is what is the person's vision for their future? How will they get there? Do they want to get a job? Do they want to go to college? Do they want to, start their own business, for example? Do they want to live independently or do they want to continue to live at home? Do they want to try to get a driver's license or learn public transportation? There's so many different components to sort of what the vision looks like. But this, I'm not 100% sure how IEPs work in New Jersey, but I know up here in Massachusetts, there's a section that talks about sort of what is the person's vision. But even getting everybody on the same page, right? The student, the family, and the school team to know what does this person want for their future, and making sure that sort of everyone is involved and it's not just the school team saying, well, we think that they should be able to do this. So, we're going to write this plan for them. And this vision should be revisited and updated periodically, right? Like think about what you wanted to do at age 14 or 16 with your life. It probably looks a little different, maybe, than what it looks like now. So this should be kind of an ongoing conversation. And then in terms of IEP goals, before the age of 16, when the transition is not the focus, mostly things are on, academic, social, emotional skills. But after 16, there are additional goals that can be part of the IEP, including things like vocational or employment goals, independent living skills, and what the goals will be will depend on assessments, right, as they are now. But there are some specific transition related assessments that can cover things like employment and independent living skills and things like that. So talking with your team about what is available and what kinds of goals might be important is a really key piece of the transition planning. And then starting around age 14 to 16, students can start to attend their own IEP meetings, and that can be a really powerful thing, both for the student to understand, what their needs are and what kind of support they're getting, but also to voice their own opinions and to be part of something. Before this time, people are there figuring out what will work best for the student, but in the spirit of fostering independence, it's a really important time for them to start participating in that conversation. So, like I said before, and this is true, this is going to be true the whole presentation, so I may stop saying it now, but every student's going to look a little bit different. Some might be able to come in and say, this is exactly what I want for my future. Other students, might be involved in sort of smaller ways, but figuring out what's best for that student is an important piece of this planning. Another thing that may happen around the transition time or may happen earlier, it depends on the person, but is thinking about disclosure or telling people about the diagnosis. And so, we sort of know from research and from stories from people with disabilities that understanding their diagnosis can be really important for their development of identity. So they can understand themselves, they can understand what they need, how to advocate for what they need. But there are a lot of different aspects to disclosure and some of them start to come up more around the transition time. So, one of the first things we think about is a parent telling their child, this is what your diagnosis is, which again may happen before this transition time period or may happen during it. But it's really important, that especially around this time where there is more ownership of their services and supports being put on a young person, that they sort of know why they're receiving the services and what's going on. Also, the individual themselves might start to think about who they want to tell and how they want to tell other people about their disability. So, friends or acquaintances, maybe a romantic partner, maybe in an employment or a school setting. And we'll talk a little bit more about employment and higher education later on, but those are all kind of important pieces that start to come around this time. So sprinkled throughout this presentation, there's some questions to think about, and I won't necessarily go through all of these just in the interest of time, but you can kind of take a look and start to think about, like, is transition something you've heard about? What does it mean to you? What is, has your young person started talking or thinking about what their life is going to look like after they leave the school system? And so, what are some kind of first steps in planning that you can kind of start to think about at this point? So then we go into turning 18, and this can be kind of an overwhelming time. There are a lot of changes that happen at age 18 and a lot of things to kind of think about and decisions to be made. But we're going to kind of break down some of those things right now. So the first and biggest thing, most major thing, if you will, is what's called age of majority. So at age 18 in the United States, adolescents become legal adults, and they're responsible for all of their own decision-making, for better or for worse. And this can be a really kind of scary time for a lot of people. This can be, an overwhelming time. You think about, like, how will this young adult be able to make all of these decisions? Will they make the right decisions? And so, but there are supports available. So for folks who aren't able to kind of maintain that responsibility, there are things that you can kind of put in place. But regardless of the choices, which we'll get into next, the individuals really should be involved in their own choices and decision making as much as possible. Even if you go with something like a guardianship, which again we'll talk about, it's really important to kind of have the individual's voice in there so that they can continue to develop those skills. So this is kind of a chart that shows the kind of least restrictive to most restrictive options for adult decision-making support. So I'll go through them quickly and then give a couple of other pieces of information. So one of the more least restrictive options is supported decision-making. And there are sort of formal models of this and less formal models of this. But essentially the idea behind supported decision-making is that the individual has a team that supports them in making significant life decisions. And in some cases, this plan is very formal. It's sort of written out. People sign agreements for it. It's very specific about who in the person's life will help with different types of decisions. So maybe, you know, mom will help with medical things and dad will help with financial pieces, and you know, Aunt Jane will help with like independent living skills or things like that. But in this case, and actually all of the cases except for the one outlined in black, the rights and responsibilities of decision making stay with the individual. So they are still sort of legally responsible for their own decisions, but in supported decision making, they have a team kind of behind them to help them figure out what the right decision might be. The next two can go hand in hand. So actually they're next to each other on the scale, but they're not, they are kind of on the same level actually. So a healthcare proxy is something you can put in place specifically for medical decisions. But these are medical decisions if the person becomes incapacitated. So for example, if they're in a major accident or they become extremely ill or something like that, you can put a healthcare proxy in place so that a parent or other adult can make medical decisions on behalf of that person. It's important to distinguish that it's if the individual becomes incapacitated, because a healthcare proxy isn't able to make sort of routine medical decisions for the person. The person is still responsible for that. So like deciding to take a medication or to have surgery or to visit the doctor. But this is sort of a safeguard in case something major happens to them. The next one is power of attorney, which is sort of a shared decision-making option. This is a legal form that you can put in place so that the person, the individual and a trusted other adult can both make financial and legal decisions for the person. So this doesn't take away any rights from the individual, but adds another person who can help them. So for maybe signing documents like a lease or a contract, or accessing financial information, or different things like that. So it gives power to, it keeps power with the individual, but also gives it to somebody else, which can be a really helpful option for people who are, you know, kind of on the border of being independent, and can, you know, generally make decisions for themselves, but just need somebody else kind of backing them up a little bit. And then the last one is a guardian. So the reason that this one is outlined in black is because guardianship is sort of separate from the others because it is a legal process. It requires filing paperwork and going to court, because it involves the transfer of rights from the individual to a parent or other guardian or other adult, sorry. And so the individual themselves is not legally able to make decisions. Like if they signed a contract, that contract wouldn't be valid. If they made sort of a major financial decision without their guardian involved, that decision could be reversed because the signing of it wasn't legal. So it gives parents or other adults the power to kind of make those decisions on behalf of the person. And this is, again, as you can see, a more restrictive option for people who really aren't able to maintain that responsibility for themselves. There are processes, and again, it's a little bit different state by state, sort of how that works, but there's usually a determination of, whether done by a doctor, done to see whether the person is kind of able to make their own decisions. And then the judge ultimately will decide that as well. And this can be general, so it can cover all decision making, or it can be limited to certain types of decisions. So maybe, the person is kind of like ready to take on a lot of things, but requires a lot of medical care and really needs somebody else to kind of process the information and make the right decision for them. So you could do a limited guardianship to medical decisions, for example. So these are just sort of things to think about. It can be helpful to, talk with an attorney or somebody else who is well versed in this to kind of go through your options and what might work best for your family. But it just is sort of important to recognize that, the thinking about what the young person is really able to maintain and what, might make the most sense in terms of how they can make decisions. So then also starting at age 18, there are a number of government benefits that people are eligible for, government benefits and other pieces. So one is Social Security income, SSI specifically, SSDI, as you may know, Social Security disability income is related to, people who have worked for a time and then become disabled. This one is available to people who sort of have not necessarily had any work experience. So individuals can apply at the age of 18, and then their eligibility is based on their current income. For a lot of people, when they turn 18, they probably, if they have a job, it's been a very part-time job, so they would most likely be eligible. There are also asset limits to this. So again, often is not an issue at 18, but can become an issue as they get older. There are some, they can't hold over a certain amount of money, but there are some savings accounts and things that kind of go along with that, which we'll talk about in a bit. Then also, if people are eligible for SSI, they're automatically eligible for Medicaid. And so this can either be their primary insurance or their supplemental insurance. So if, for example, the parent has private insurance, their child can stay on their family plan until age 26 or potentially longer if their insurance offers a waiver. So that's something to kind of talk about as your young adult is getting, closer to 26, asking the insurance like, hey, my child has a disability. Is there any way to kind of keep them on our plan? But regardless, so if the child remains on private insurance, then Medicaid can act as a supplement, which will cover things like copays and prescription medication, which can be really helpful for the person. The next one is not really a benefit, it's more of a requirement. So still in the US, young men must register for the draft at age 18. We haven't had an active draft system in many years. So this doesn't at all actually mean that they will be drafted. But the way it kind of works is young men have to register. Then if the draft were to be sort of reenacted, then they would go through a determination and see whether the person would actually be eligible to be part of the military. It seems a little bit backwards, but that is the way the system is. And this is really important if the person is receiving any government services like SSI, if they're going on to college and they are getting federal student loans, this process must happen around 18. So it's really more of a registration than anything else, but it is really important to know about. And then the last thing that can additionally be really helpful is if the person doesn't have a passport or isn't learning how to drive, doesn't have a driver's license, a non-driver ID card, which is acquired through the Department of Motor Vehicles, can be a convenient form of government ID. So they would carry it around as if it were a driver's license. Doesn't give them the ability to drive, obviously, but is a convenient and more portable and maybe a little bit safer form of government ID than like a passport. So another piece here is the transition of healthcare. So this is something that came up a lot when I was working in the hospital system. And so around, 18 to 22 years of age is when a lot of pediatricians plan to transition their patients to an adult provider. And so talking with your pediatrician about, who, if they have recommendations of adult providers, what their process looks like, if there are things that they can help with, is an important piece. But also knowing sort of what that means. So the shift of focus in care is really from talking with the parent to talking with the patient. So, clinicians should be directing their questions to their patient, not necessarily to the parent. Parents can still be involved in medical visits if the person wants, but the question should really be directed to the patient as much as possible. And then the young people also, if they don't have a guardianship or somebody making medical decisions for them, then there are new responsibilities for them too, like managing their medication and taking care of themselves, scheduling appointments and things like that. So that's something to kind of start preparing for early so that the young person is ready for that. And then one other piece that is sort of important to know, that with adult providers, the care is really primarily coordinated by the primary care physician. You may, with your young person, have a developmental behavioral pediatrician, or maybe a pediatric psychiatrist or neurologist or something like that. But unfortunately, with the great thing is that DBPs exist for young people. The challenging thing is that there's no adult equivalent. So if you're working with one of these providers, they may do a lot of coordination, a lot of advising on goals and services and things like that. And unfortunately, there is no adult equivalent of that. So that sort of, disability specific care may transition to a different provider, like a psychiatrist or a neurologist, or if there are complex health needs, a specialist or different things like that. But this website, Got Transition, is a really excellent resource. It has a lot of information for parents and youth on transitioning healthcare. So that's a really good one to kind of take a look at. So again, lots of questions to think about, and I realize that I'm running a little short on time, so I'm going to go kind of quickly through the next ones, but I'm happy to sort of cover these in the Q&A as well. So there are a number of services and things that can come in for after someone leaves school that can start to be put into place around 18. So there are a number of supports for sort of independent living and housing that people can apply for. The major one being the Division of Developmental Disabilities. This can provide lots of different types of support depending on the person. I believe they also have child services that might look a little different, but that's something that people can sort of apply for and may be eligible, with some support starting at age 21. There are also young people with disabilities are eligible for Section 8 housing. So that can be, assistance with private housing. There's also a specific one for New Jersey. So that's something that if the goal is for the young person to live independently, it's really important to apply as early as possible because some of the wait lists can be very long. So that's just something to kind of be aware of and look into. And then there's also SNAP benefits. So that can provide some additional income for food. So that, can be really helpful if the person is working only a little bit or isn't working. That can help a lot. So employment and vocational training honestly could be its own, any of these topics really, but this one in particular could be its own, multi-hour talk. And so I'm just highlighting a few of the sort of available supports and services because there are lots of components and things to consider when trying to find a job for a young person, but these are some of the available ones. So there's vocational rehabilitation services, or voc rehab. They can provide individualized support. There are also one-stop career centers that are more general. So if somebody isn't needing more individualized support, but just needs to like have somebody look at their resume or something like that, those centers can be helpful. And there's also a benefits counseling program. So if somebody is receiving Social Security and also wants to work, as I mentioned before, there are income requirements for SSI, so that can kind of help people balance out, keeping their benefits or figuring out how to maximize their benefits while also working and contributing in that way. And then the last piece is just something that I wanted to highlight. AANE is actually based in Massachusetts, but they provide virtual coaching across the country. And that can be a really helpful service for folks who are looking for any sort of life skills coaching. And they also have I think they have a work specific one. They have a college specific program. So that can be a helpful service. It is private pay, but they have a number of options for that. And then a little bit about higher education. So there are sort of tiers of support that can come in when you think about higher education. So some people might be ready for sort of a typical college experience, taking classes, living on campus. Some people might need sort of specific supports or accommodations to access higher education. These are going to look a little different than like an IEP, for example, because IEPs are youth focused. The Disability Services Office may use somebody's IEP to sort of guide what kinds of accommodations they might need. But the accommodations aren't sort of curriculum focused. They're really focused on how can we help this person access their courses. So things like extended time for testing, any classroom modifications, supports around organization or, note taker, or lots of different things like that can help the person access the curriculum. And then there are a number of specialty programs. So some of these people might earn an associate's degree or earn some credits for taking courses, but they're more they might have more intensive residential or academic support, and those are specifically for students with disabilities. So I listed a few here that are in the state of New Jersey, but there are a number of others sort of around the country as well. And those can be good options for people who are interested in higher education, but aren't really able to have a more traditional college experience. And then the last piece, and I know I'm just about out of time, but I just want to highlight a few things here. As I mentioned earlier, Social Security has an asset limit, which means that people can only have a certain amount of money like in their savings account. But to sort of get around that or to allow people to save, which is a really important thing for financial security, there are these things called ABLE accounts. And those are specifically for people with disabilities to save more money and then use that for qualified disability expenses. And that is a very broad definition. There are lots of different things that people can use their ABLE money for. So that is something that, if you're looking into Social Security, also thinking about setting up one of these accounts so that there is sort of a safety net for the person. Because the last time I checked, and it hopefully may have gone up by now, but the asset limit for Social Security was like $2,000, which is not very much to save for, in case something happens for a person. So these ABLE accounts can be really helpful. And then the next two are sort of more for parents to think about, but for sort of long-term financial planning, a special needs trust can be really helpful because that will sort of allow you or somebody else to leave money to a person without impacting their benefits. So for example, if grandma is planning to put your young person in their will, it can be helpful to set that up to go into a trust as opposed to directly to the person, because then that doesn't affect their benefits. And then the last thing is just something that I kind of recommend as good practice. We talked a little bit about power of attorney and healthcare proxy, but for the young person, but also can be really helpful for parents to have too, because especially if there are lots of things that you're coordinating and figuring out, and you have a specific vision for sort of how your young person is going to live and be taken care of, putting that all in writing and having somebody else to kind of enact your wishes can be really helpful. So just something that to kind of look into and think about. So again, questions to think about, sort of what's the plan, what's going to happen, and making those plans. So just leaving you with this quote, transition to adulthood is not a journey that happens overnight or in isolation, but it will happen, and it's best to be prepared. It will happen whether you're ready or not. And but sort of knowing and watching videos like this or attending talks like this, reading and taking advantage of the resources that are out there can be really powerful, so that you can know what to do. And I know I went through that super fast, so I am happy to spend the next bit of time answering questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you everybody for being here with us. And with that, we are going to move to our Q&A session. That part is not recorded. I also want to thank the Graham Lab at Tufts University for making possible this type of presentation for us in the community. I know it took a little back and forth in relation to getting this done, but today we are here. So thank you very much. Mm-hmm. With that, let's move to our Q&A session. Thank you very much.